A woman's body, charred beyond recognition, lying in the snow. The brutal cold should have preserved her, but instead, the fire left nothing but haunting questions. Who was she with that night? Who was the man she trusted enough to walk into the darkness with? And why did the police believe they had their suspect, only for him to disappear without a trace? But here's where the story turns darker. 1 year later, almost to the day, another woman is found. The same gruesome fate. The same eerie setting. The same unanswered questions. A killer who may have walked free, hidden behind a false name, a clever lie, and a case that the world was too quick to forget. What really happened to Margaret Brown? And did her killer strike again? Tonight, we go deep into the mystery that left an entire town afraid to step into the snow. It was a brutal winter, the kind where the cold cut straight through your bones. The streets were silent, covered in a thick layer of snow, broken only by the distant glow of gaslights flickering in the night. In a town where everyone knew everyone, Margaret Brown was a woman of mystery. She kept her secrets close, her personal life even closer. Some whispered about a lover, a man she met in secret. Others claimed she was involved with someone she barely knew at all. But one thing was certain, on that fateful night, Margaret stepped out into the cold, and never returned. When her body was discovered, burned beyond recognition, the town was shaken. Who would do such a thing? A violent crime in a peaceful place, where locked doors were an afterthought. The last person seen with her claimed to be a doctor, a man named Clement. But when police went looking for him, the truth unraveled fast. The man Margaret trusted that night may not have been who he said he was at all. As the investigation began, the town held its breath, desperate for answers. But then, just as quickly as the case had gripped the headlines, it went cold. No justice. No closure. Margaret's name slowly faded into history, until 1 year later. Because on almost the exact anniversary of her death, it happened again. Another woman. Another fire. Another mystery buried beneath the snow. Was this a coincidence? Or had a killer been hiding in plain sight all along? The morning air was bitterly cold, the kind that stings your lungs with every breath. Snow blanketed the quiet town, untouched, except for a single, horrifying disturbance. Just beyond the edge of town, in a secluded spot where no one was meant to be at that hour, a discovery sent shockwaves through the community. Lying in the snow was what remained of Margaret Brown. She wasn't just dead. She had been burned. Her body, charred beyond recognition, lay motionless against the white landscape, the contrast as stark as it was terrifying. The flames had devoured most of her clothing, leaving little behind to tell the story of her final moments. And yet, there was something eerie about the scene, no obvious signs of a struggle, no footprints leading away. Whoever did this had either planned it meticulously or disappeared without a trace. The town, once a place of safety, was suddenly gripped by fear. Who could have done something so cruel? Was it someone they knew? And why had Margaret, so private, so careful, become a target? Then came the first piece of the puzzle. A witness. A woman, Elizabeth Emily Miller, stepped forward with a chilling recollection. She had seen Margaret just before her disappearance. And she hadn't been alone. She was with a man who introduced himself as Dr. Clement. But when police later found the real Dr. Clement, there was one glaring problem. It wasn't him. Who was the stranger who had stolen Dr. Clement's name? And why had Margaret trusted him enough to leave with him that night? The deeper investigators dug, the stranger things became. Margaret's life had been a mystery, but now, it was her death that would haunt the town forever. The case should have been straightforward. A woman murdered. A name, Dr. Clement, whispered by those who had last seen her. But the moment police thought they had their man, the truth slipped through their fingers like smoke in the cold winter air. Dr. Clement was real. A man with a past, a reputation. But when investigators brought his photograph to Elizabeth Miller, the last person to see Margaret alive, her reaction sent a chill through the room. "That's not him," she said without hesitation. "That's not the man she was with." Confusion rippled through the investigation. If it wasn't Dr. Clement, then who was it? Witnesses described the man in conflicting ways. Some claimed he was young, others insisted he was much older. A thin figure, they said, but even that detail seemed to shift depending on who was asked. It was as if the suspect had no true identity at all. And yet, police remained fixated on one idea: Dr. Clement must be involved. They combed through his life, his past, his whereabouts. But their search would soon hit an unexpected dead end. Because before they could question him further, Dr. Clement vanished. No trace. No explanation. Gone. Was he running from guilt? Or had the real killer just slipped away while everyone was looking in the wrong direction? The investigation was crumbling. The town was growing restless. And then, just as Margaret Brown's case seemed destined to be forgotten, another body would be found. A murder that looked hauntingly familiar. And this time, the killer left something behind. A missing man. A stolen brooch. And a murder that no one could solve. Dr. Clement was finally found, but not for the crime police had been chasing him for. Not for the brutal murder of Margaret Brown. Not for deception or a tangled web of lies. Instead, he was arrested for something far less sinister: theft. A diamond brooch, taken from his own wife. A piece she valued at $600. But to Clement, it was worth far less, just another object in a life that was quickly unraveling. The headlines should have been about justice for Margaret. About an arrest that brought closure to a town haunted by her death. Instead, they spoke of a petty crime, a courtroom focused on stolen jewelry, while her killer walked free. And with that, Margaret Brown's case was left to fade, gathering dust in the archives of forgotten tragedies. Days turned to weeks. Weeks turned to months. The town moved on. The papers found new stories. The whispers of her name grew quieter and quieter, until they stopped altogether. But then, almost exactly 1 year later, another body was found. A woman. Murdered. Left in the snow. Burned. Just like Margaret. And this time, the killer made a mistake. 1 year had passed. 1 year since the brutal murder of Margaret Brown. 1 year since her case was buried under newer headlines, newer tragedies. 1 year since her killer had slipped through the cracks, vanishing into the cold winter air, unseen. Untouched. Unpunished. And then, as if fate had been waiting, the silence was shattered. Another woman. Another crime. Another body, burned in the snow. The town's peaceful facade cracked, the past bleeding into the present. Fear crept back into the streets, whispers growing louder. Was it him? Had he returned? Or had he never left at all? This time, the police couldn't ignore it. This time, the pressure was unbearable. They had let Margaret's case go cold. Had they let her killer walk free? Had their tunnel vision, their blind pursuit of Dr. Clement, cost another life? The public demanded answers. Investigators were forced to look back at the details they had once overlooked, the inconsistencies, the contradictions. If Clement wasn't Margaret's killer, then who was? And was he still out there, hidden in plain sight? And the most chilling question of all, Would he kill again? 2 women. 2 murders. 1 year apart. Both burned in the snow. Both taken before their time. And yet, no justice. No closure. No answers. Margaret Brown's case faded into history, overshadowed by new crimes, new headlines. But should it have? Should we accept that some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved? Or was the truth always there, hidden between the lines, buried in overlooked evidence, lost to time? Dr. Clement, was he truly the man police believed him to be? Or just a convenient suspect in a case they never fully understood? Was there another man, another shadow lurking just beyond their reach? Someone who knew how to slip away, how to disappear, how to kill, again? And if this case happened today, with modern forensics, surveillance, DNA testing, would the real killer still be a mystery? Now, I turn the question to you. Who do you think was responsible? Did the police chase the wrong man? And most disturbingly, did a killer get away with murder? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Let's keep this discussion alive. Because sometimes, the past still has secrets waiting to be uncovered. And if you love deep dive true crime mysteries, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. There are more stories waiting to be told, and some you won't believe.